Hello, everyone. Here is my question for you. When is the best time to train a child? And the answer to that question is 100 years before they are born. That is a quote from a man named William Inge. Not sure how to pronounce his last name actually, but it's INGE. 100 years before they are born, which raises another question. What are we talking about? How is that possible? Doesn't sound right. Well, here's the answer to that question is you build a multi-generational family dynasty. There you go. Of course, what is that? From one question to the next. That is what I teach. I teach families how to build a multi-generational family dynasty. To that question, training a child 100 years before they are born, only a multi-generational family can do that. So we need to make a contrast point here. This is a subject very few people understand or are aware of. So we need to make the contrast. Western families today, they don't think of it in these terms or use these labels, but I would say 99% of modern Western families have as part of their family model a mono-generational platform. And part of what that platform, that model, how it expresses itself is that there's a generational reset every generation. Another descriptor of that family model, this comes from my mentor, Jeremy Pryor, who had used the language of it's an individualistic family model. I'm forgetting the sociologist's name. I'll remember later, but he used the word atomistic model. Going back to Jeremy Pryor, one of the things how he describes it is part of what this model is the purpose of family is to be a launching pad for the children, the next generation, to launch them into their individual pursuits. And that might not sound bad in of itself, and actually that's part of what our contrasting model does as well. But we need to add the qualifier exclusively so. It's just a launching pad for their individual pursuits. There, what is absent there is any sense of a family mission, let alone that generation, but one that has come from the past. Okay, that is the monogenerational platform model that 99% of Western families run on. The contrasting model, the multi generational dynastic model, that model, another term word we can use, it's getting a little more descriptive and helpful. It is a trustee model of family. Like if you think of a trustee, what a trustee is and does, trustee is a steward of assets, resources other than their own. They are given. They need to preserve it, improve it, and then pass it on to beneficiaries. So the trustee model of family inherits a family culture from the past, preserves the good, weeds out the bad, improves it, passes it on to the next generation, improved family culture. Part of the thing that they're passing on includes this idea of passing on. The next generation does the same thing. You can see where this goes. So that is the multi-generational family dynasty model or a trustee model of family. Some families are not ready for that. So part of moving in that direction is a change of framework mind on this question of family. That's something that can be unpacked later to see it more fully in the biblical sense, where we would get into the doctrine of called covenant succession. That's where this all ultimately comes from. Okay, flowing out of biblical inheritance and covenant succession. Why would a family want to do this? I'll share. There's multiple reasons why. Well, one is that's we could argue it is the biblical model of family. We can go down that route. I'll tell you why I was inspired to do this. I was on that mono-generational platform, loved my family, but also was a father with three sons, young sons, and a father with a lot of ambition. I was experiencing for several years 9 to 5, come home, dinner, family, bills, administrative stuff, something always going on the weekend. I lost time and energy to work on what I considered God given projects, passions, ambitions. For me, that's primarily expressed through research and writing and teaching. I became very bitter towards God, and I saw my family as the primary obstacle, the barrier to serve in what I perceived to be my mission, my calling, my vocation. And then I went to a friend of mine introduced or invited a handful of us to this, for lack of a better term, a seminar talk. I think he titled it something along the lines of multi-generational or family teams on mission, something along those lines. And it was introduced to me to this model that we're talking about, the multi-generational family. Short of it, what I saw, paradoxically or ironically, was that contrary to the family being a barrier and obstacle to my ambitions, they were the most leveraged tool to see my ambitions fulfilled on my own, with my own life. I only have my own lifetime. I saw here through a multi-generational family that the convictions, the passions, etc., that God gave me could be exponentially multiplied. I could have exponential impact precisely through my family. So I was absolutely inspired. Sometimes how I explain this to new families is, consider your ambitions that you have, and consider the experience we all have of limited resources, be it time, money, our own personality limitations, this, that, and the other thing. And I asked, what if I gave you, I can say, 100 years, 1,000 years, all the time in the world, all the resources in the world? And you say, well, that's a pipe dream. But just imagine it. Wouldn't that be quote unquote great? You can have that for your ambitions. Well, that is what a multi generational family does. In a certain sense, it really does. It should be absolutely inspiring. All right. So, again, we'll save longer explanations for that later to see that model. But let's transition. Let's say, okay, I want to do it. What do we do? There are three practices of a family dynasty, or a multi generational family dynasty, or a trustee model of family. Three disciplines are governance, two, culture, and three, wealth. All right. First, governance. This I primarily learned through James Hughes Jr., who's widely regarded as probably the father of the modern multi-generational family. I don't know if you can call it a movement, barely, it's not well known, but the leading expert in this field in our generation. And although this is not intuitive, what his experience and research led him to is this idea of governance. Okay, well, the one way he says it is, for a family to be successful on this multi-generational endeavor, each generation needs to make slightly better decisions than the previous one. Okay, so that's a good way of thinking about it. One example, each of these are a book and hours unpacking by themselves. So I'm just going to give one example, kind of a brief explanation of each and one example of it. So one prime example of this discipline of governance uh, for families aspiring to become a multi-generational dynasty is creating a family constitution. Okay, we'll just leave it at that right now. We could expand that more, but just you can put that in the back of your mind as one of the things that you're going to be working on is creating a family constitution. Two, second discipline that multi generational families walk in is what I call the culture bucket, the culture discipline. Here might be a fancy word, enculturation. I first was labeling this discipline first as education, but also call it training in the Christian context, discipleship. But eventually and ultimately, I came to this idea of culture. That is a much better idea than those other terms. Education can mean just, it can have connotations of just knowledge, mere mind, training, how to, all right, skills, etc. All that, yes, but culture much better. So here's why. Yes, so the education. One of the things you're going to have to do as families is you're going to have to be the principal of your own family and think through the philosophy of your education. We'll consider, academics, absolutely. Okay, and you're going to have to train them. But culture, ultimately, for the multi generational aspect, there's a phrase I use, what is sticky, what sticks is culture. You can't just address the mind or the hand, the how to. The appetites, the loves, the desires of your family, they're going to have to fall in love with your family mission, culture, values, etc. It so happens that the disciplines that are more geared to those kind of things are less academic. They're multi-sensory. So here's the one example I'll give. A leading primary example that you're going to cultivate is holidays. You're going to have to do holidays better. Holidays are multi-sensory. Kids love them. They practice them and learn the meaning later. So the illustration or the example I always give with this is, whether you're aware of it or not, Jews practice the Passover at Seder. Seder means service. All right, celebrating the Exodus. And in the Exodus story, in the law of celebrating Passover, one of the things that is in that story is part of the ritual is eating bitter herbs. And then the passage talks about tell your children, why you're doing this. Okay, the bitter herbs are a symbol of the slavery to the Egyptians. Okay, so it's a redemption story. And so when they celebrate this, their liturgy, their service has the father ask. Well, the children are given a question that the father answers. The child asks the father, on every other night we eat normal vegetables. Why on this night do we eat bitter herbs? And the father then goes to explain the meaning of the bitter herbs in the context of the Exodus story. There you go. There's that. Christians, here, give an example. Christmas. Do Christmas better. Take ownership of it. Don't let the culture tell you how to do it. Create extremely meaningful Christmas season celebration. All right, connect the rituals and the joy with the meaning. Oversimplification, we'll leave it at there. You're going to need to uh, do your rituals. Another thing I'll say with culture is not intuitive compared to, like, okay, academics. So we got to design a curriculum. Let me ask you a couple things here. What does your house smell like at different times of the year? What are your car rides like to and from the store with kids or the family? You don't normally think of those as categories if you're designing an academic curriculum, but as those just little examples, those are extremely relevant to culture. Most of it, that's just passive stuff, but when you get this, you're going to need to cultivate those kind of things. All right, we'll leave it at that. Third and last thing is wealth discipline. And this is not a monogenerational wealth philosophy, it is a multi-generational wealth. And for the sake of time and wrapping it up here, I'm just going to give two examples of the things that you're going to be doing here. You're going to be building a family bank using a whole life dividend paying life insurance policy. And you're going to be building a family office. Right now, my leading recommendation for that is something called a private interest foundation, not available in the U.S. Different countries have them. Panama would be one of my leading recommendations there. So without explaining it, that should at least give some suggestions to your mind of some of the kinds of things you're going to do, the disciplines you're going to put in place if you want to flip the switch from a individualistic, monogenerational family model to the multi-generational dynasty family model, to be a trustee family, to be a family that is practicing covenant succession. If you want to hear more about this, go to Amazon.com, look up the book Families in Covenant Succession, a manual for multi-generational faithfulness by yours truly, Jason Diffner. Thanks.